This weekend, the Russo Brothers follow-up to their minor hit Avengers Endgame, Cherry, debuts on Apple TV+. So today I'm going to stop and rank all 7 Russo Brothers films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of all 7 Russo Brothers films, or at least the ones that you've seen. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. As we go into this, there will be differences between this ranking and my MCU ranking.
No way!
And the reason for that is I do my rankings based off the category that they're getting ranked in. In MCU ranking is I'm looking at that film as an MCU film in addition to that franchise, and when I do a director ranking, it's trying to look at them more as just films in and of themselves. And there's a bit of a difference there, and you'll see that in this ranking, and I'll try and explain why as we get to where the differences do occur. And let's get started. In last place is You, Me and Dupree, a fun cast, but a totally generic premise. About 10-15 years ago, when this movie came out, there was kind of this trend of putting out movies where an annoying person joins a family and hijinks ensue. That's exactly what this is, and it contains sophisticated humor like Dupree eats chicken wings and then his poop stinks.
Ew. I thought my jokes were bad.
It seems like there was potentially an interesting setup here, but in the execution, everything just feels so contrived and unearned. I mean, at its core, the Dupree character is just so selfish and clueless in the first half of the film that it makes him totally unlikable in the second half, and you don't want to see him succeed. A bunch of the conflict and drama with the Matt Dillon character could simply be resolved if he would have a conversation with his wife about her dad, which he doesn't do. The wife never seems to fully acknowledge or take responsibility for the fact that she wasn't listening to her husband. So it's a movie to me that, you know, it's a fun cast. There are some chuckles here and there, but you don't see any of the creativity or talent that's on display in every other Russo Brothers film or TV project that they were involved in. This is by far the most generic thing that they've ever done. Coming in at number 6 is Cherry. As the Russo Brothers follow-up to Avengers Endgame, the biggest movie of all time, that starred Tom Holland, I was naturally incredibly interested in this film, and it was in my top 15 most anticipated films of the year, and unfortunately, it turned out to be a gigantic disappointment for me. Now, the movie does display that Tom Holland is a tremendous talent that's going to be around for a long time, and he is a lot more than just Peter Parker. This dude can truly act.
Excellent!
And the Russo brothers have a tremendous amount of talent, but with this movie, felt like you were watching a director trying to impress you rather than them trying to tell an organic story. At its core, you have a movie that touches on veterans, PTSD, the financial crisis, the opioid crisis, but through the movie, I don't think it had anything to say about any of those in a compelling way.
Bogus.
It had all the potential material, world-class directors, world-class star for the movie. And by the end of it, I was like, okay, there were some interesting things in there. There were some cool sequences. There was a great performance, but it didn't come together to be anything memorable or have anything to say other than, look what we can do, which is disappointing. In 5th place is Welcome to Collinwood. The Russo Brothers' debut came out almost 20 years ago, and it was in a window of time where I was first getting into kind of smaller indie films. So I remember when this movie came out, but honestly, I don't remember if I saw it when it came out or if it was just a film that I wanted to see and never quite saw. It was produced by Steven Soderbergh, and at that time, he just was like one of the kings of indie films, these small, quirky films with these all-star cast, frequently featuring Sam Rockwell and George Clooney, who are both in this film. And at its core, it's an offbeat, low-key heist comedy.
Cool.
It's very much a product of its time and this particular producing team. A lot of movies had this vibe to it. So even though I don't even remember if I saw this movie back in the day, it's a movie that as I was watching it, I was still kind of feeling nostalgia for this kind of banter between characters and the hijinks that ensued between everyone. I just kind of dug it. It's not great. Of these types of movies, there are far better ones. There's also far worse examples of them, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. It does have a great cast, and there are some laughs sprinkled throughout. And for me, it did kind of pull out some nostalgia for a way of filmmaking that happened 20 years ago. In fourth place is Avengers Endgame. Now, to state the obvious, when it comes to just phenomenal sequences, the greatest fan service of all time, the last hour of this movie is something truly incredible that is basically unprecedented in cinema, of so much coming together and making so many nerds cry with joy opening weekend.
You did it! Congratulations!
That last hour is something truly very special. And even the first hour of this film, as a follow-up to Infinity War and kind of dealing with all these characters and their grief and their frustration, really powerful stuff. As a movie as a whole, I do think it has some weaknesses. Now, it's an A-something movie for me. I love this movie. But I've always mentioned I have issues with the Big Thorbowski, that they took what potentially could have been a great character arc for Thor, and they played it a little bit too much like an SNL parody of the character rather than a serious exploration of someone with PTSD.
Well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Likewise, when they start traveling through time, the movie kind of loses a little bit of energy for me. And so it's a movie that, of course, it's great, but as a whole product, I think I have, of their 4 MCU films, it's the one that I have the most issues with. And it's also a movie that depends on your knowledge of the rest of the MCU. It certainly doesn't stand on its own. It exists as a phenomenal peak for everything. But if you just watch it in and of itself, that it doesn't really exist to do that. And so for those reasons, that's why it's at number 4. But there's also a huge gap between Welcome to Collinwood and Avengers Endgame. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember, my list is not the right list. It's just my list, and I would love to see yours.
I have spoken.
Also, I've done a bunch of these director rankings before. Quentin Tarantino, David Fincher, Guy Ritchie, Michael Bay, J.J. Abrams, M. Night, and more. You can check that out right up here if you've enjoyed this video. In third place is Avengers Infinity War. Now, I absolutely love this film.
I like it a lot.
That they were able to bring together all of these Marvel franchises with very different tones, sets of characters, and pull it all together is a tremendous achievement. It's such a joy to see Doctor Strange and Tony Stark and Star-Lord interacting back and forth in all of these bananas scenarios where Spider-Man is going to space and all these epic battles are happening. It is truly amazing.
Excellent.
Add to that, you've got Thanos as one of the great movie villains of all time. And as much as he is this madman, there's a logic to what he's doing. You feel the pain as he makes these choices, and they find a way to take this guy that's doing something horrific on a personal level and as a grand level, horrific, and make him sympathetic. And you feel what he feels in some of these moments, and it's a movie bold enough to let the villain win by the end of it. So I absolutely love this movie, jam-packed with so many phenomenal, great moments, great laughs, great interactions. The reason in this ranking it's dropped lower than it is in my MCU rankings is because it's designed as, chapter 21, 20 of the MCU. It is not designed to stand alone. It starts and it doesn't really introduce us to any of our heroes. It just assumes that you know who they are. And so when you're ranking it as just a movie, that holds it back because it doesn't really work as just a standalone movie.
Well, that's your opinion.
That's kind of where I see some of those divisions and how I think about some of these things. This is a true phenomenal event. Standalone film? Not so much. Our runner-up is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now, one of the things that makes the Russo Brothers filmography so interesting is that it's so diverse, especially when you bring television into it. But their first film, Welcome to Collinwood, is like an indie, quirky heist comedy, and then they followed that up with a very generic comedy, and then they worked on the show Community for several years, which is this kind of bonkers, crazy show about a community college. And none of those things are anything like Captain America: The Winter Soldier. None of those would make you think they're going to be perfect to do a spy thriller that's bringing big influence from a bunch of 70s movies. But the brilliance of Kevin Feige is that he can spot talent, and they had some pitch that he went, yeah, these guys from Community can pull this off. And they went off and they crafted this intense thriller inside of the MCU that has the fantastical elements and hovercrafts flying over cities, but also grounds a bunch of the elements just a little bit more. The action is a bit more visceral and violent. Awesome! The elevator fight sequence in particular, it being a big, gigantic standout in the film. But all throughout it, you have just the right amount of humor, the right amount of action, compelling intrigue, and like a sense of paranoia that brings all these new elements into the MCU that we hadn't seen before, and has big, gigantic plot twists that turns the MCU on its head entirely. Put it all together, and you just have a really solid film. Now, I know a lot of people have this one even higher up on the list. I gotcha. I know that I'm a little bit in the minority in not having this one in the absolute top category, but I've just never it's never pulled as big of emotions out of me as my number one pick. But coming in at number one is Captain America: Civil War. What I love about this film is that while it does contain a bunch of superpowered people and technology that doesn't exist, at its core is an ideological difference between the two sides of our Avengers, where everyone wants peace, everyone wants to save the day and be heroes. The question is, how do you do that? And two good guys can have two very different perspectives on what the right way to save the world is. And that's what it's at the center of this story. You have two different Avengers with two very different backstories, different loyalties, and that's where the conflict comes from. Not just because someone has some big nefarious plan, but because they have different value sets and different histories. And that's where conflict is kind of the most satisfying to me, where it's most meaningful, when you really can have a debate back and forth after you watch the movie as to who was right and who was wrong. This movie came out 5 years ago, and still in my comment section, you've got Team Iron Man, you got Team Captain America having very different perspectives on who was right and who was wrong. As the comic book movie, you have the phenomenal airport sequence that's just a comic book fan's dream come true. And then the end of the film has this very emotional finale that's not the biggest sequence in the film, but it's the most personal, as two friends turn on each other, and it leads to our Avengers breaking up.
That escalated quickly.
And so, therefore, for me, putting all the pieces together as just a movie, not factoring in inside the MCU with other stuff, coming in at number one is Captain America: Civil War. If you enjoyed this video and want more director rankings, check out that playlist right over there. I've got Tarantino movies, M. Night Shyamalan, J.J. Abrams, Guy Ritchie, Michael Bay, and a whole bunch more. If you like this video, there's definitely something else in there that you'll enjoy. And keep talking movies too much.